My name is Daniel Kingston, and I am a junior boys leader.
What does it look like to be honest with God when you're hurting? Why should you?
A word that comes to mind is relationship. God tries to have a relationship with you and me, and He wants us to be vulnerable, to take steps of faith towards Him. It could look like the smallest things, like at night when you're praying, being honest about that hurt, being vulnerable, bringing it to Him, or when we're singing a song at church, having it in the back of our head, bringing it, laying it on the table, and seeing what He does with it. And then finishing this question with a verse. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness.
How have you honestly expressed your feelings to God? How did that feel?
Being honest in my life looks like when I speak, what I think, what I do with my time. It's so important to what comes out of your mouth glorifies God, what you think about glorifies God, and then what do you spend your time on the most, right? Once you're able to be honest with these things, it really changes this, and these three things mold who you are as a person. That's what it looks like in my life.
How has praying helped you when life is hard?
So there's this time in my cabin up in Kelowna, and we have a boat, and it wasn't starting this one summer. The starter was gone on it. And you'd have to crank it a certain way, and then it might start, it might not start. I was cranking this thing for 40 minutes straight. I finally am so frustrated, so angry, and I was like, I give up. And then my grandma goes, one more time, just try it one more time. And she goes, Lord, please. And then again, after 40 minutes, cranked out, the first crank starts off perfectly. So I think that was a huge reflection on my life on how the right attitude, the right posture can change the outcome of a situation.
Hey everybody, hey, super excited about diving into our next session in our series, Spiritual Disciplines, talking about training for life and beyond. Super excited about that. For those of you who've been with us, you know that we're like kind of coming out of this passage in 1 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul, the guy who wrote Timothy, is saying this. Listen to what he says. He says, have nothing to do with irreverent, silly myths. Rather, train yourself for godliness. So he's like saying, hey, listen, like becoming the people that God would have you to be, getting your like character shaped into the way that God would have your character, the way we treat others, you know, the way we honor others, the way that we live with integrity, it actually takes some work. Like there's some training that we got to do with that. It doesn't just like come naturally. We have to kind of dive in and invest in it. And then he goes on and he says this. He says, rather train yourself for godliness, for while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way. So it's kind of cool here. Like Paul's kind of aware of what it looks like for us to train our bodies, get the exercise in, do what we need to do to develop ourselves physically, right? So I've mentioned this before at this stage of my life, spending a little bit more time in kind of like the body training stuff. So with some of the people I work with, we do these types of practices or contests, if you will, maybe challenges. Right now, you know, we have this challenge of 100 push-ups a day. So trying to get in like 100 push-ups every day. And I'm going to be honest with you, like do not enjoy the 100 push-ups. Don't enjoy it, but really enjoy being finished the 100 push-ups, correct? You get it. You've heard me say that before. There's this idea that Paul is saying that when it comes to like training our souls, not just our physical bodies, there's this same kind of work that sometimes has to happen. Doing the practices that help grow our souls, grow our character, sometimes doesn't come easy. Sometimes it takes some work for us. And he says, hey, you know, sometimes we train our bodies, that's good. But then he goes on and he says this, but godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. So he says, hey, listen, physical training, good for this life. You should do it. That's great. But godliness, your character, like who you really are, your soul, that makes a difference both now and for eternity. That's the stuff that really matters. Make sure you put the work in there. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. And we're looking at different types of practices that we can do to help grow our godliness, help us become the human beings that God has designed us to be, more like His Son Jesus. How good is that? So today, I want to talk about lament. Now, lament is so interesting because it is very rare we talk about lament like at youth group and stuff like that, but here's what it is. Lament is essentially us being honest about the hardships, difficulties, hurts that we experience in life with God, right? So, I was talking to a friend of mine who was just talking about how the last couple of years have been pretty tough on many of us, especially if you're like in high school, you've had dreams for like life after high school or through grade 11 and grade 12, and those things look really different now than maybe what we thought they would be 3 years ago. And it's been difficult and it's been hard. And one of the practices that we as people who love Jesus might do in this time is engage in lament, like just being really honest about how difficult and hard this is. Some of the doubts that we've experienced, some of the anger we've experienced through this time as we wrestle with, man, what's taking place in my life and what role is God actually playing in this? Now, if you're like me, sometimes you've kind of had this idea that God can't handle our doubts or God can't handle our anger, but the reality is that when it comes to a relationship with Jesus Christ, it's about all of who we are. It's not just about the things we think about. It's not just about like right and wrong things to do. God actually wants relationship with all of us, and that includes our anger and our difficulties and the struggles that we're having and the doubt. And in fact, doubt actually isn't the opposite of faith. Unbelief would be the opposite of faith, or despair might be like the opposite of faith. Doubt puts us in a position that can actually give us an opportunity to explore faith in a deeper way, to actually move closer to God in a more honest way. So we love this idea of lament. Now, if you look in the Bible, especially in the Psalms, there's all sorts of great examples of lament in the Psalms. And there's kind of like this order that happens when most people are being honest with God in the Psalms about some of the struggles or things that they're wrestling with. So I'll take a look at one real quick, Psalm chapter 4. It begins with like this address and introductory cry. So it's this idea of being like really honest of what's happening. It says in verse 1, "Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer." So this is like David being really honest about what's happening. And then it moves to like the complaint or the lament, being like honest again about what you're struggling with. And he says, "How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods?" But then it shifts to like confession or trust. So now he's saying, "Know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him." So there's this honesty of how we feel, but there's also this honesty of who God is with us in the midst of what we're feeling. And then finally it moves to like a prayer for deliverance. He says, "Tremble and do not sin. When you're on your bed, search your hearts and be silent. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord." Many, Lord, are asking, "Who will bring us prosperity? Let the light of your faith shine on us. Fill my heart with joy when their grain and new wine abound." And then finally, it ends in praise. Finally, at the end of this, it says, "Okay, God, this is who you are. I trust you." And he says, "In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety." So there's like this crazy honesty with God, like emotionally honest about what's happening right now, struggling with what might be, and then like really clear though in light of this, like what I want, what I'm asking for God, and who you are. And so still I'm gonna trust you even in the midst of this. So there's this really incredible honesty that happens with lament that I think is super important for us to like work through when we're really struggling. And this could be one of those seasons when we're really struggling. So hey, you guys, today so excited. My friend and many of your friend as well is Colin Lancelot. Colin, wait, I've got this. Colin Sir Lancelot, as if you've ever heard that before.
First time today, absolutely. Never heard that before.
Never heard that before. Yeah. That's so cool. By the way, I remember like when I first met you, I was like, that guy's got like coolest youth ministry name ever.
It works well. I don't think I have met anybody with that last name before.
I know, and you legitimately, Colin, are like one of the coolest people I know, period. As you guys know already, Colin is super cool. You notice the tattoos? I love your tattoos, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much.
And I've offered to actually do like your sleeve.
I'd love for you to do that, Sid.
And then it would probably lead you to a place where you could do lament after I did that for you.
Painful experience.
Painful grieving.
Painful during, painful after.
I knew you'd love that.
Yeah.
Hey, Colin, real quick, listen, half our students know who you are for sure, probably most do, but not everyone knows exactly what you do. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Colin. What do you do here at Village? Come on, talk to us.
Yeah, totally. So my name is Colin, as you said. I'm married to my wife, Kelly. We live here in Surrey, BC. We've been here for just over 2 years, and we're actually from Edmonton originally, so from Alberta. But I have the privilege of being able to oversee our junior high youth ministry at Village Church. So it's been a great time hanging out with the junior youth students, and we're just loving it out here in BC.
And Colin, like how many years have you been working at Village for now?
Just over 2 years, two and a half years. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so Colin, today we're talking about lament, which, I mean, you and I have already mentioned this. It's not every day we talk about lament.
No.
Especially not with maybe junior high students who are also in the audience. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So tell me again, Colin, why do you think this is an important practice for our students to be thinking about?
Totally. Yeah, I think there's two really important reasons that we talk about lament. And I think the first one's this. Life is hard.
Yeah.
I think that life is really, really difficult. And I think in life, there's these things that we go through. And it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's times that we go through in life that are just really, really difficult. And I think, I know for myself anyways, in my walk with Jesus, I think I had this false idea that if I chose to follow Jesus, that I wasn't going to go through pain and suffering.
Right.
I thought if I chose to follow Jesus, he was going to protect me from pain. He was going to protect me from bad things happening. But then, over time, I've come to realize that that's just not the case. There's a verse that came to my mind that I was thinking of, and it's John 16, verse 33, where Jesus says these words, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world.
Yeah.
So it's just that idea that, in life, it's guaranteed we're going to go through difficult times. And I think what we do with that is really important. So that's kind of my second idea too, is that, we are going to go through difficult times, but what we do with those difficult times is what matters. Because I think sometimes when we go through pain, when we go through grief, sometimes our tendency is to run away from God when really God wants us to be really close to him during those times.
Colin, I think this is so important, just even what you're referencing there, is because sometimes we have this idea that God's primary responsibility is to make us feel good and be happy. Do you know what I mean? But there's so much of life that actually isn't that.
Totally.
And I think in those moments, if we think God's primary job is to do that, in those moments are well, is there even a God? Does he actually exist?
Totally.
And does he even love me? But the scriptures are so clear that he does love us, that he is present, and that his role isn't to primarily remove us from difficulty, but to actually journey us through.
Yep.
And his promise is that he'll shape us in the midst of the hardship, right?
Exactly.
It's so beautiful. Okay, so question about lament, and I think lament is part of that process of him shaping us, by the way. But I was thinking about some of the scriptures, and there's a passage in scripture in Philippians that says that really we should do everything without complaining. Do you know what I mean? We are the people that know that there is a God who is a good God, who is at work for us, all these sorts of things. And there is this scriptural passage that speaks about the idea that we shouldn't be people who are, constantly complaining. And isn't lament, wouldn't you say lament is simply a form of complaining? Or how do we wrestle with that tension?
Totally. And I was, even thinking through that, because I think sometimes it can almost feel like the two things are similar. And when I think about the idea of complaining, though, I almost see it as something that's a little bit more self-focused, and it leads to us going horizontally rather than vertically.
Brilliant. I love that.
So it's just kind of
when you say going horizontally, you mean it leads us to a place where we think mostly about ourselves as opposed to shifting our focus to God. That's what you're trying to say there, right?
Yeah, but then in another way too, though, is I think sometimes when we have these things that we're going through and that we're processing in this pain, sometimes we'll go to the wrong people, and it can easily go to complaining to the wrong people. Maybe it's, or even then gossiping too, right? So if you're going through just grief through a relationship or just different things that are going on, sometimes we end up going to those around us rather than going to God first. And I think it's important that we do have those safe spaces that we're going to, but I think sometimes it leads us to going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think that's really good, Colin. I think you just distinguished something really important there for me, that complaining or lament, really the purpose of and who you're trying to engage is really important in understanding the difference, right? So complaining is a way of just kind of airing our frustrations, perhaps, and maybe even a way of feeling sorry for ourselves. Yeah. Whereas lament is an honest processing with God himself in terms of the hardships or difficult things that we're experiencing. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
Good. Love that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay, I think that's great. When you think about lament, Colin, what are some practical ways that you would engage in lament? What does that look like for you to practice lament?
Yeah, I think for myself, I think it takes a lot of self-awareness. I think just sometimes we could be in the process of grief and not even know it. So I think just that process of, just realizing that those emotions are there. And then I think just almost giving myself the freedom to know that it's okay to not be okay all the time. And I think especially in church or sometimes, showing up to youth group or going to church on Sunday, it's we have to act like we have, or we think that we have to act like we have it all together, that we're, always joyful, we're always happy. And that's just not always the case. So I think and practically just giving yourself the space to be able to go through those difficult emotions are huge. And just being aware of things that are maybe going on beneath the surface in your own heart.
Yeah. I love what you said, Colin, when you talked about this idea that we might feel the pressure to have everything all together, and especially at church. Do you know what I mean? Like, when I think about some churches and their experience, you always show up with the best clothes on, everything's geared up right, you're all smiles and happy in the lobby and those sorts of things. And I think sometimes if I think about my own journey and some of the hardships that I've gone through or my friends, you almost feel so out of place there because everyone looks like they have it so all together. And you're like, but I don't have it all together. Like, can I even belong here? And it's interesting when I think about, who Jesus calls us to be, that, church should kind of be like the safest place for broken people to roll into because Jesus really gets our brokenness. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Bible is so clear that he became broken for us.
Yeah.
And in fact, when you read the scriptures, in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he goes to the cross, right?
Yeah.
He actually cries out a prayer of lament to God, where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or when he's on the cross, sorry, my God, why have you forsaken me? And in the garden, he says, could you take this cup from me? Like, is there any way out of this thing? So I think there's something really inviting about this idea that we have a God who actually understands grief and hurt and pain and actually the experience of lament, right? That's pretty powerful for us.
It's so powerful.
Yeah. Colin, like when I'm thinking about a practice that we could lead kids into, like we would say, hey, here's a challenge for you this week or something you could do. What do you think? What would be some possibilities that they could do when it comes to lament?
Yeah, like I mean, there's definitely like a few. Like I think one that comes to my mind is just journaling through lament.
Right.
Yeah, I think sometimes even when we don't know how to because sometimes even the practice of prayer on your own, going through this process, it might be kind of hard to do, especially at the start.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes even just journaling things out can be extremely helpful. And the thing that I love about God is that He's a big God. He can take our stuff. Like we don't need to sugarcoat things. And the thing that's really cool about God is that He actually knows our pain even more than we even understand our own pain.
That.
So I think taking time to just acknowledge the pain that's in our life and to write those things out and just to go to God and be like, hey, God, like, this is what I'm going through. And I know that you're the one that I need to run to. I know that you understand this. I know that I can trust you in this, but this is the pain that I need you to help me with. And just take time to just write it out and journal. And there's lots of students that, that I've talked to that are journaling already, but just being really intentional in that focus. And just knowing that you can just let it all out on that piece of paper.
Yeah, one of the things I've found, Colin, is that journaling helps me be honest even with myself. So if I'm just like praying in my head or whatever, then I'm like, I can move through stuff quickly. But when I'm writing, sometimes I'll be journaling and go, oh, that's actually not really true.
Yeah.
This is what's really true. And then I write that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for us to experience God in the midst of us being honest about what's really true in terms of what's taking place. But then, if we think about the journey of lament, it's not simply writing what's really true about us. It's also writing what's really true about God.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So we don't just sit there. If we just stay in that space without acknowledging who God is, then there's actually no hope moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is there's lots of music that, if I'm working with a student who's really struggling, okay, like this is a really hard time. One of the questions I'm asking them is, hey, what's on your phone these days? What are you listening to? What's the music you're downloading and stuff like that? And oftentimes the music relates to the experience that they're in. And I appreciate that. I understand that. But very rarely does it offer a way through the experience that they find themselves in. And I think that's the real beauty of the gospel, right? Like the good news of Jesus Christ is not only does he relate to what we're in, but because he's gone through it, because he died on the cross, rose again, he actually has a way to carry us through that now so that we too, in his time, in his way, and that time can look real different, that we can actually experience life again on the other side if we engage this process of lament really well with him. So
yeah, so true.
Yeah, I'm really thankful for that. And I know, Colin, as you've shared your story with me, when we would talk about lament, that's a real thing for you. That's not just oh shoot, I stubbed my toe, on my way to work, although that's a real thing. But there's been some real depth to that. Can you tell me, Colin, and I'm not even quite sure how I want to ask this question, but tell me what it was like for you. You had some dark moments, what it was like for you to be honest with God and how important that was on your journey through some of your dark moments that you've experienced.
Yeah, no, I think, going through those difficult times, because there's been so many different things. Just to give a bit of context too, I've had, my three closest friends from high school have all passed away due to life choices that they had made and we were all making together. So, I think it's one of those things where there are just so many questions that I had about God's goodness. God, are you good?
Right.
God, do you love me? God, do you actually care? Are you far off and distant? And I think the process of lament has really given me the opportunity to just see how close God really is in those moments.
Yeah.
And just as painful as things are, I feel like it's some of the most painful times. That's when I've actually experienced God the most, or that's when I've experienced his love and care for me the most.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting about that too is that this idea of lament, it's not just about grief and things that have happened to us, but there's also the process of lament of our own sin.
Oh, wonderful.
And the things that we have actually done to cause pain. And it's not about like shame and condemnation, but I think it's one of those things where we actually, in the process of going through our own grief and lament, we're almost like grieving with God for the things that his heart is passionate about as well, in the world and the things that we see around us. So I feel like not only do I understand that God's with me in the pain, but I can actually identify with God himself more through that. So like, so just even like just over the past season of my life or past seasons of my life going through this, I think lament has been just this like gateway or this doorway for me to actually enter into a deeper relationship with God.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's so cool. You know, I was just thinking about if we're going to enter lament and be honest, what's necessary for us? I think number one, we need to be confident, right? So, you know, we're going to like really be honest and open with God, and we're confident in the relationship that we have with him. There needs to be an element of that. There's childlikeness. There's like honest, raw expression of emotion. But like a child, when you're done expressing that, you know, in a healthy environment, you can rest in your parents' arms. So we get to have that with a father. I think that's love. That's awesome. And then compassionate, what you just referenced, where we have the ability, people who do lament well have the ability to weep for others who hurt as well. We have the ability to come alongside. Yeah. So I think this is really just so significant, not only in our growth. This practice is so important, not only in terms of our growth with ourselves, our growth in terms of our relationship with God, but also our growth in terms of our ability to love others well.
It's so true.
Yeah. Hey, if there's anything that you would leave our students with, Colin, just as we kind of end our conversation, one last thought, what would it be? What do you want to give to our kids?
Yeah, I think it's the idea that God's for you, even in your grief.
Cool.
I think sometimes it's easy to go to the place like when you're going through difficult times, and I kind of alluded to this already, but it's like, God, like, do you actually care about me?
Yeah.
God, do you love me? God, can I actually trust you?
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those things where when we look at the life of Jesus and what he went through, his death on the cross, it just points to the fact that not only does God understand our suffering and our grief, but he actually cares about it. And like, I think the thing that I want to leave with students is that, like, I know they're going through difficult stuff. Like, there's a lot of the conversations that I've had with students, there's a lot of pain that they're going through.
Yeah.
And I just want to encourage them to go to God with that.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to do it within the context of community. Like, that's what we would love this place to be, a place that would would be safe for our students to be able to wrestle with these realities within our context of our community and experience God and his grace, and I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, hey, listen, man, this has been a lot, and there's a lot to process here. Here's what I want you to do. We're going to break up into our small groups. We're going to talk about this a bit, and then over the next week, we're going to actually practice what does it look like for us to do lament. Okay, God bless you as you go do this.